Well, the government is receiving an absolute pounding in the poll a week after the budget. Labor now enjoys a massive 12-point advantage over the coalition on a two-party preferred basis. Joining us now is the man who conducts the polls for Fairfax Media, John Sturton from Nielsen. John, good morning.
Good morning, Chris.
Give us the historical perspective, will you, on the primary vote, the two-party preferred vote. How bad is this poll for the government compared to polls for other governments and other tough budgets?
Well, this is one of the worst starts that any government has had for a start. I mean, they never had a honeymoon and fell behind in all the polls late last year and pretty much have been behind ever since. A little bit of closeness earlier this year, but this budget has seen the government's numbers go backwards quite dramatically, and that's pretty unusual. We don't usually see a lot of reaction to budgets over the last 20 or 30 years. Most of the time, the first poll after a budget has hardly moved at all or doesn't move at all, certainly never up, and only a couple of budgets have moved down, and only by a tiny amount. This budget's moved down by quite a lot, so it's not a good result for the government. They would have been hoping for a lot better. Just on one measure, the satisfaction with the budget, net satisfaction with this budget, is minus 32, and we've never had a net satisfaction rating for a budget that high. That means that much more people are dissatisfied with this budget than satisfied, and that compares to John Howard's first budget in 1996, where satisfaction was actually plus 18, so more people satisfied with that budget than dissatisfied. The Howard government, after the 96 budget, stayed ahead for a year or more, whereas the Abbott government has just fallen further behind.
So the 1996 budget was a tough budget, but people accepted that it was necessary medicine. Your polling shows that a majority of people think the budget is not just unfair, but a majority think that it's not good for Australia. How does that compare to the historical record?
Well, this is the first budget in which we've seen a majority of voters say the budget's bad for the country. 53% believe the budget's bad for the country. 42% say it's good. Now, that's the first time, as I say, we've had a majority say that. In fact, for past budgets, more people have said the budget's good for the country than bad. The other thing is 74% of voters think they'll be worse off as a result of the budget, and only 8% believe they'll be better off. So again, the message that the government's been giving, that we need a tough budget, I think was one of the reasons Tony Abbott won the election, and so people were expecting it to be tough. But I think that the real key finding in this budget is the proportion of people who think it's unfair, and 63% of voters believe that the budget is unfair, with 33% saying it's fair. So that's a huge difference. We've never had a majority before say a budget's unfair, and this is a two-thirds majority. So I think it's the unfairness that may be driving a lot of the problems in the government's vote and in Tony Abbott's personal standings.
And the majority saying that it's not good for Australia. What does that say about the effectiveness, if you like, of the government's narrative?
I think the government's really struggled to explain the particular measures that they've introduced. They were very successful in opposition and reasonably successful so far in government in explaining the need to get the budget back into surplus. And in fact, 53% of voters still accept the notion that that's necessary, and that's barely changed in 2 years. But what the government has clearly failed to do so far is explain why these measures, why these amounts, why pensioners and students and younger people seem to be taking a much bigger hit than, say, higher income earners. That's the part of the budget that people are not understanding, and that's the part of the budget that the government has not sold at all well so far. And I think if the government is to recover from this, and of course they have plenty of time to recover, but if the government is to recover, they need to address this issue of unfairness. They need to address why some people seem to be carrying a heavier load than others.
Okay, John, can you once again give us the historical perspective? When a government takes a really big and sudden hit in the polls like this, typically how long does it take them to recover? Is it just, is it a short down and a short up, or is this going to take the government some time to turn around, if at all?
The government's fallen way behind in this poll, but previous governments have done that and recovered. And in fact, the Howard government was well behind in its first term, well behind in its second term and its third term, and came back to win elections. So recovery is always a possibility, but I suspect this time around it will take some time. 2001 is the example where John Howard was probably in the most trouble, and in April of 2001 John Howard was behind by 60 to 40 on a two-party preferred basis, so he was in a deeper hole than Tony Abbott is now. And it was in contrast, John Howard used the 2001 budget to start to turn things around. There was a lot of perception of unfairness with the introduction of the GST, and John Howard addressed that with some measures in the budget for older voters. And he did see some slow improvement, because I expect the improvement will be slow when it comes. He got slow improvement towards the end of 2001, and then two big events, which were the Tampa incident, with the interception of a boat of asylum seekers off Christmas Island, and of course September 11 in 2001. And those two events in particular turned things around, and John Howard won the 2001 election. So things can turn around, and as I said, previous governments have been behind and recovered. But I think what is significant about today's poll is that this government is in deep trouble very early, and that's very unusual. First budgets for all previous governments, even when there have been tough budgets, the government has stayed in front and maintained its relative popularity for some time.
Now, I noticed that for the first time Bill Shorten has opened up a significant lead as preferred Prime Minister over Tony Abbott, 51 points to 40%. But is this a measure of Bill Shorten's popularity, or is it more a measure of the relative unpopularity of the Prime Minister?
Well, I think Bill Shorten's seen some improvement in his personal numbers. His own approval rating is up to 47%, which is pretty good for an opposition leader this early on. He's opened up a gap as preferred Prime Minister of 11 points, 51 to 40. But of course, it's all about relativities, and Tony Abbott is very unpopular at the moment. He was also unpopular in opposition, and Julia Gillard was unpopular as Prime Minister. So it's possible for both leaders to be unpopular, or one leader to be popular and the other not. So Shorten could be down as low as Abbott, but he's starting to make some ground on his own, I think. And I think partly that's because this government has left or created a significant opportunity for Labor to revisit what they'd probably call in business jargon their core values and what they're about. And it's given Bill Shorten a tremendous opportunity, and I think last week's budget in reply speech was he was grabbing that opportunity to rebrand Labor and represent Labor as the party for the underdog. So I think part of it is success for Bill Shorten himself, and of course part of it is just a reaction against Tony Abbott.
Okay, John Sturton, interesting times ahead. Thank you so much for your time today.
Thanks, Chris.